Okay, well, thank you again for giving us the opportunity to present virtually. Sorry that Ishwan and I couldn't be in there in person, but we're looking forward to hopefully being there for the next convening. So it's been a little bit of time since I'm just making sure my slides. Okay, yeah, it's been a little bit of time since we last connected. So we just want to give a recap and refresher for those that are new to the convening around who we are and what the Payment Hub is and does. But over the past year, we've been able to make some good upstream contributions to the Payment Hub for deployments outside of the Mojaloop context, but will benefit all the potential Mojaloop users of Payment Hub. So I want to walk through some of those changes, as well as some of the additional use cases that we've been working on supporting, and then discuss a bit some of the areas we're looking to collaborate with others in the community. So my name is Ed Cable. I'm the president CEO of the Mifos initiative. I've played an active role in the Mojaloop community over the past couple of years and still sit on both the community council and the product council. So looking forward to continuing that collaboration. And Istvan will also be presenting today, and he also sits on the design authority. So for those who are not familiar with Mifos, we are another digital public good that's part of the DPGA's financial inclusion community of practice, along with public goods like MOSIP, aiming to advance and scale innovation around financial inclusion. And I'll talk a little bit more around the impetus for why it was so critical to bring together Mifos and Mojaloop through the Payment Hub. But one key point I want to emphasize is that Mifos as a core banking system, providing a set of open source building blocks for managing accounts, loans, and orchestrating payments, it enables that long tail of innovation and adoption amongst those DFSPs and fintechs that need to connect to an interoperable instant payment system like Mojaloop. So it's very key to highlight the vibrant and large ecosystem that is a part of our community, which dovetails nicely with that of Mojaloop. So most of you are all pretty familiar with the Payment Hub, but just wanted to give a brief look back at the origins of the Payment Hub. So the Payment Hub had its genesis in 2019 with a grant from Dial to explore the integration of these two synergistic and complementary digital public goods, Mifos and Mojaloop. And then with support from the Gates Foundation in 2020, we were able to, with the leadership of DPC, build out the architecture and implement the production grade version of the Payment Hub. And then throughout the course of the past year, we've focused on deployment of the Payment Hub, increasing scalability and upstream contribution through partners in our ecosystem and customers who are contributing back features, and bringing together Mifos and Mojaloop with Payment Hub tying them in the middle provides an end-to-end open source architecture for digital financial services as a whole, which can enable the ease of participation in the switch itself, but also a rapid pace of innovation of new apps and services on top of the digital rails. And this is just one, closer look looking at the building block components that are in Mifos and Fineract, the core banking system or store of value or account management, and then how the Payment Hub or the orchestrator facilitates the movement of value on top of those accounts or wallets, whatever they might be managed within Fineract. And so real briefly, I'm going to give a high level look at some of just what the Payment Hub does and some of its business benefits. And then Istvan's likewise going to do the same, but we'll go over these pretty quickly as these are points we've hit upon on previous convenings. But first off, just around the need as the Payment Hub as a flexible tool to enable the participation of DFSPs of all sizes, as well as fintechs to participate effectively in a Mojaloop switch or an instant interoperable payment system. And likewise, the Payment Hub can help in demonstrating the value of Mojaloop to additional stakeholders at all levels to allow them to interact and see the benefits of Mojaloop through a robust set of open source tools to visualize what the Payment Hub can do and what Mojaloop can do. I'll skip over this slide as Istvan will talk a bit more around the technical components, but I just wanted to talk a little bit around what the Payment Hub itself does. So first off, it provides that ease of integration for a DFSP looking to connect into the Mojaloop switch. It provides a sophisticated orchestration engine, which allows very ease of configuration in defining new workflows and use cases that need to be routed through the payment system. It also provides an operational control center to allow the DFSP participating in the switch to effectively respond to failed transactions and visualize and see what transactions are flowing through the system at a performance and analytics level. And then I'll talk to this a little bit more as we speak to the use cases. But the Paymenthub, first off, it provides that integration and orchestration layer. And then for other use cases, we've used the Paymenthub as a mapping and transformation layer between two message protocols. And then we've also been recently working on use cases around G2P, centering the Paymenthub to act as a pre-processing layer for bulk payments. And then lastly, we're going to speak to how the Paymenthub can act as a gateway layer with some of the stablecoin and CBDC innovation that we're seeing right now. And so just to emphasize once again, the Paymenthub, it is highly extensible. So leveraging the ZV microservices orchestration engine at the center, you simply build additional connectors. So this might be connectors for additional banking channels, additional core banking systems, or additional payment schemes. It's highly configurable. You simply need to modify an executable BPMN diagram to modify the transaction flows. It's scalable across a number of different deployment models, and it's practical in giving the operational tools that are necessary. And I'll skip over this slide as it's there for the benefit of those looking at the materials we sent along. But just once again, points we've made in the past, but wanted to emphasize for DFSPs of any size, whether it's a tier 1 institution or tier 2, tier 3 MFIs and SOCOs, it can ease the participation into a modular switch, especially from the perspective of those smaller MFIs and SOCOs who might need an entire end-to-end solution. So if a MFI didn't have a modern core banking system, they could access both a Mifos or Fineract core banking system in the cloud, along with the Paymenthub to both have a digital store of value for their customers, as well as a means of connecting into Mojaloop, leveraging the multi-tenancy that we provide in the platform. And then for other institutions, whether they're larger DFSPs that have their own existing core banking systems, they could simply build another core banking system connector on top of Paymenthub and connect in. So it's not just only for those institutions using Mifos or Fineract, but as we've seen from some of the experiences Myanmar, where Masoni, Finflux, as well as those institutions using Mifos directly, they had a core banking system with a modern API, which made it easy for systems like Payment Manager to connect into Mojaloop. And then regulators are also another key audience that could benefit from the Paymenthub, as I've spoken to on previous presentations. And then the last audience I just wanted to reference in terms of why the Paymenthub matters to are the fintechs and third parties that are looking to innovate, but not directly participate in the switch. So we'll speak to some of the use cases we've demonstrated in the past around open banking APIs and our plans to try to integrate in with the PISP efforts that are ongoing in the community. And then just want to emphasize that as part of the lab environment we have available, there are widespread range of tools that can allow the benefits of a switch like Mojaloop to be demonstrated and interacted with at multiple levels. So I'm going to pass it on to Istvan now, who is going to give a brief recap on the technical benefits of the Paymenthub, and then I'll speak to some of the use cases and changes we've made over the past several months.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, depending where you are. I'm Istvan Molnar, and the technical part of this Paymenthub, a quick brief. So the concept, I would say, pretty straightforward. You have instructions coming in. You need to talk with the core banking systems, what you are having, and you need to talk with one of the payment schemes. Mojaloop is one of the ones that is obviously possible. All of these components to serve this purpose runs technically on a Kubernetes cluster, having this well scalable and I would say modern architecture, and all the components are built on pretty standard technology. What I would say a really useful concept in the whole platform that enables system integrators to build their own connectors and build their own payment scheme connectors. So it's really flexible platform, provide this whole runtime, and could be utilized to communicate with various networks, various core banking systems. Obviously, in our implementation, the Fineract is one of the core bankings that we connected the platform, and the Mojaloop network is one of the key networks that we also implemented the connectivity. I would say that the idea that this component is from the ground up is an open source project, meaning that it's really there for others to adopt and utilize it. So the whole idea was that there's a central component who orchestrates the processes, and that's the only stateful component which keeps the state of these processes in a distributed database. And that's what all the integrators could leverage. And on top of that, there are connectors around the system or around this orchestration layer. They could be deployed as individual, independent components into this Kubernetes cluster and can be implemented technically in any programming language. And a couple of major ones are obviously supported out of the box with the necessary communications. And all of this gives kind of a good scalability and fault tolerance to the whole platform, and what we expect in a payment solution, that it should work. If it's really 24/7, that's what we were aiming for. Yes, next one, please. Yeah, a couple of concepts that what we were considering, let's say, as the non-functional requirements as the software. So the payment flows should survive all kind of failure incidents, and we should have timers to look for timeouts and do the necessary interactions, and so on and so on. So the idea was that make it a really fault-tolerant component, really ready for payment orchestration. The deployment models, what we come up that one size really doesn't fit all, but the concept that with the help of this Kubernetes cluster and modularity, we can really stream it down to a development computer, and we can go with a bare bone implementation, or we can go with a more clustered multi-node installation, or we can go with a fully scaled setup running across multiple data centers, being it on premises or being it in the cloud, quite easy to deploy and seems to serve that purpose that could be part of a bigger solution. One additional benefit of this whole setup that it could be a multi-tenant solution, just like Finera inherently ready to support with a single deployment, multiple DFSPs, let's say. Similar to the Paymenthub with a single deployment is capable to provide the necessary payment orchestration for multiple DFSPs, single deployment, but segregation at the database level, so all operators see only their transactions.
Yeah, thanks, Istvan. And Istvan will return to speak about some of the new use cases that are being supported with the Paymenthub. So I'm just going to walk through at a very high level some of the additional enhancements that we've been able to make into the Paymenthub over the course of the past year, through the upstream contributions that have been coming from some of the deployments of the Paymenthub within the Mifos ecosystem. And so to date, unfortunately, we still haven't had a Moduloop production level deployment on top of the Paymenthub. So that's something that's one of my key goals for the next several months, and something that I hope we can enable, as I do believe the Paymenthub can add a lot of value, especially to regions like Myanmar and WinePay, where there are so many MFIs that still need to connect, and likewise with tips as well. So that's a major objective, is to make some of these POC level Moduloop integrations production ready. But this is a map of some of the ongoing deployments of Paymenthub and some of the ones that have gone live this past year. So I'll speak to a couple of the enhancements that have gone back into the Paymenthub through some of the upstream contributions from Finerfin, as they've been working with deploying Paymenthub for a couple of the deployments you see on screen. And so those will be the 1 Acre Fund deployment out of Africa, and then the Sierra Leone OpenG2P deployment. So at a high level, some of the functionalities, enhancements that we've been able to make into the Paymenthub over the course of the past year include helping to demonstrate the production grade readiness of the Paymenthub. So for 1 Acre Fund, they're utilizing the Paymenthub to orchestrate and handle all of the mobile money repayments coming in via M-Pesa. And so right now, I think their volume is approximately 2 million transactions per month, with 40,000 transactions as the peak volume for daily transactions. So we've migrated all of those workloads over from their previous integration tool. And then they have plans to expand this across additional countries in Africa. But this has been a great use case to demonstrate some of the MFI collection flows as part of Paymenthub and demonstrate the architecture of the Paymenthub and the ability to support this scale. So we're eager to do the same with similar MFI transaction loads, but with Mojaloop as the underlying payment system. And in support of these deployments, you'll see a few of the other enhancements, which I'll walk through in the subsequent slides right now. So first off, to support both the deployment in Sierra Leone as well as the 1 Acre Fund deployment, we made some improvements to our message gateway. So we integrate with a number of SMS providers like Televisit, Rapid Pro, and I believe Twilio. And this handles both the sending of notifications to customers around the repayments, but also allowing them to respond back to ensure that in the case of especially the G2P transactions, they have indeed received their payments. And so this has been incorporated as another service into the Paymenthub. For the operations interface, which is built on Angular, we have made some minor enhancements there to support the input of additional fields, but nothing too significant has changed in the interface for the operator of or the DFSP participating in the switch, but the operations interface still provides a valuable interface in which to see details on all the transactions, initiate refunds, etc. And then an area where we did make some good improvements is around leveraging like Kibana and the Elk stack to provide more dashboards into monitoring the status of transactions, and especially being able to dig deep into the reason why transactions have failed and not gone through. And so these are just a couple of the visualizations from those dashboards. And then we've also built out some of the additional connectors that I mentioned earlier. And then we've also increased the deployability of the Paymenthub by having more of the tool configurable via Helm charts and whatnot. And so all of that's now in the Paymenthub repositories on GitHub. And so the next portion of what I want to walk through is just giving a brief recap of the previous use cases that we already were supporting through Paymenthub that we've had a chance to demonstrate at past convenings. And then I'm going to speak to and share a bit more details on some of the additional use cases that we've been supporting. So to recap, as I noted at the onset of the presentation, we've been utilizing the Paymenthub as this integration and orchestration layer to enable DFSPs as well as fintechs to participate in an instant inclusive payment system like Mojaloop. And so at previous convenings, we have demonstrated the P2p transaction, a merchant QR code payment, the merchant request to pay flow, a refund transaction, as well as third-party initiation via an open banking API. And then we also demonstrated previously the Paymenthub as a transformation layer for a cross-border remittance use case scenario. And then some of the use cases today that we're going to speak to for the first time. So around the Paymenthub as an integration orchestration layer, speaking to some of those MFI collection flows for the 1 Acre Fund deployment, some ongoing work one of our partners in Mexico is doing around leveraging the Paymenthub for QR code-based payments around the Cody system there. And then speaking to some of the ongoing efforts with the Paymenthub as a component of OpenG2P, as well as some of the ongoing discussions we're having with Steve, Michael, and Paul around digital public good collaboration and bulk payment integration. And then lastly, Ishtvan's going to speak to the Paymenthub as a gateway layer for some of the stablecoin work that we are seeing in our ecosystem. So first off, I'll go through these slides relatively quickly, but I think at the first convening where we participated back at, I think in January of 2019, we simply demonstrated the P2p flow on top of the Paymenthub via transaction in Mojaloop. And so this just represents one of those configurable and executable BPMN diagrams that are in ZB, where you simply define the additional workers here, and then you can define the steps that the transaction would go through. And then subsequent use case that we demonstrated was using some reference mobile applications to allow a merchant to generate a dynamic QR code and then have a customer scan that QR code and have the payment be initiated through Mojaloop. And then the next use case that we previously demonstrated was around the request to pay. This is one where we just built out the flows in the Paymenthub, but we still have yet to integrate in our reference mobile wallet channels. But now that we have the message gateway integrations in place, we can generate those necessary notifications or SMSs within our mobile apps and then have the customers respond to them. But these are just some of the visualizations of the request to play flows within ZB. And then one other previous use case that we demonstrated was around the capability through the operations web interface to initiate or reverse, do a refund transaction in Mojaloop. So there's a couple of screenshots just recapping what we had demonstrated in that regard. And then we also spoke to previously around some of the efforts of what we pulled together for our submission to the Bank of International Settlements, a hackathon around cross-border remittances. So demonstrating how the Paymenthub could act as that transformation layer where a DFSP sitting on both an ISO 222 network or a Mojaloop network could do a transaction and leverage the data-rich standards of ISO along with the last mile delivery of Mojaloop. And then Istvan, did you want to speak to this a little bit? I can go to the next slide, but I think this one is valuable to have you explain a bit more at a technical level how that mapping was done.
Yeah, probably that's the core of this solution, that in the middle there's a Leopard bank, which is kind of the corresponding, which we don't necessarily like, but somehow this is what is happening, that's this central bank, the Leopard bank, having the technical accounts and having accounts in participation in both networks, both an ISO 20022 based network and also in this case in the Mojaloop based network. And this could help with the usage of the Paymenthub to make the transactions across the various networks possible. And in this scenario, we initiated an SEPA instant payment and reached Leopard Bank. And with the additional information in the transaction, we were able to route it to another participant who is reachable only by the Mojaloop network. Yeah, so this is the process, and that's one of the questions that was raised, that this is an executable process, and the individual boxes on this diagram are the one that the various connectors around the process engine executes. And this is the flow that we executed at central to do the necessary communication. And obviously the whole point that this flow could contain asynchronous correlated messages, could contain timers, retries, so handle all those scenarios which are not straightforward to handle in a, let's say, lower level programming language. And to really just show that this transaction has taken place, so all the couple of screenshots and the messages, what is coming out from this system. And so we initiated the PAX 008 on the ISO network. There are the various steps at number one, what happened in the transaction over there. Then the transaction arrived to this, let's say, correspondent bank, which completed the real-time transaction. Given timing is important, so it's really finished this part of the transaction and then initiated the continuation or the next flow of the transaction over the Mojaloop network.
Okay, thanks, Istvan. And then one other use case that we demonstrated, and this was prior to the PISP APIs being developed as part of the core Mojaloop system, but we demonstrated the ability for a third-party fintech to initiate a transaction via an open banking API, which gets instantiated over the Mojaloop switch. And so this is something, an effort that we'd like to, leverage to better align with and integrate with the ongoing efforts with the PISP API, as well as like the version of the PISP API that will be connecting into bulk payments as well for some of those G2P specific use cases. But we do see the Paymenthub as being a valuable tool, along with the reference mobile applications we have to enable third-party fintechs to provide innovative services that have value flowing through Mojaloop switch. And these were some of the screenshots that we'd shared on our previous demonstration of that use case. And so in terms of like the newer use cases that we're now either supporting or beginning to support, we're going to walk through those right now. So the first one was around this MFI collection request in the context of the 1 Acre fund. So as noted earlier, they're routing all of their M-Pesa repayments through the payment hub now. And this was just a flow diagram of the flows that occur and take place in that regard. And then this is the equivalent ZV diagram of that collection request. But as noted earlier, we're very happy to be testing out some of these good transaction volumes within the payment hub around important use cases like MFI repayments and collections. And then the next use case is still under development, but our partner FinTech Yando in Mexico, they're working with the central bank there to enable additional QR code acceptance across the merchants, leveraging the Cody QR code platform that they have there. And so they'll be utilizing this for both person-to-person QR code-based transactions, as well as merchant-to-person transactions. So they'll be leveraging both Apache Fineract and Mifos to manage the accounts, and then Paymenthub to orchestrate the transactions and allow for additional data to be data and value to flow along with the QR codes. So we're looking forward to that use case kicking off throughout the course of, I think, mid 2022. And then the next use case that I wanted to spend some time around, and it's an important one, as Michael, Steve, Paul, and others know, there's a lot happening around social protection and many different initiatives around aligning digital public goods. So we've had the opportunity to be a part of like the GovStack and the payment building block there, be a part of the ongoing work of the Digital Public Goods Alliance and the Roundtable as part of the Financial Inclusion Community of Practice, and likewise the Digital Convergence Initiative, which is aiming to bring together digital public goods to meet end-to-end use cases like social protection. So I think many of you have seen this mapping that the World Bank provides of the life cycle of a social protection or a government to person payment. And so this is some of the articulations we've utilized in the past to showcase how different DPGs can assume different roles of this end-to-end life cycle. So Mifos is one of the stewards of the Open G2P project, which centers more around the beneficiary management components and now integrating tightly with MOSIP for enrollment and identity. But I'm going to focus today on the payment leg as part of social protection. But what our goal is and what we believe we can achieve is we can demonstrate how for social protection use cases, you can have an end-to-end solution as well as reference architecture that brings together multiple digital public goods that you see on the screen here. So MOSIP can be utilized for digital identity and authentication, a platform like X-Roads for data intermediation and sharing data across different programs in a government ministry. And then OpenG2P can be utilized as that beneficiary management system. And then Fineract and Mifos as that store of value or platform to manage an account. And then Mifos to facilitate the orchestration of the payment. And then Mojaloop to actually be that payment rail. And so just to dig in a bit further, or this is just another view of that slide, but looking at the different components as part of OpenG2P to help digitize the payment leg of a social protection transaction. And I think I accidentally skipped over one slide, but this is just another articulation that I'll dig into a little bit deeper on a slide, but trying to show what the role is and necessary for store of value and account management, along with process orchestration, and then the actual payment rail itself. And this is just one other view, so apologize if there's multiple views, but there's a good way to slice and dice the social protection life cycle to showcase how the different digital public goods can be brought into the mix. But in this case, you would see the Mojaloop switch here. I'm going to dive into that at a deeper level on the subsequent slides. So here, the value that the payment hub would provide is serving as like the bulk processor, or as we've seen in the past, like the payment manager could facilitate this role as well. But in the case of a Mojaloop system, where there is a centralized hub-based switch, the payment hub would break down the payments based on I'm going to switch back to this slide here. So in the case of a Mojaloop switch, the payment hub would process and break down the bulk payment into payments per DFSP, or in the case of there not being a centralized switch, the payment hub could break down the bulk payment and process it according to the various payment types that are in place. And I'll just walk through a little bit more of what we are aiming to put into our bulk pre-processing component, which I think aligns with a lot of the discussion that has occurred in the past, looking at how, what needs to occur in pre-processing before a transaction actually hits the bulk payment API within Mojaloop. So in this case here, you see the bulk processor, and then this would either be the payment type topic or the DFSP topic, and then this would be broken down, as you see on the subsequent slide, either into, in this case, the distinct payment types, or if this was a Mojaloop implementation, this would be broken down into the specific DFSPs. But right now, we are in active conversation with Steve, Paul, and Michael, exploring, how we can leverage some of the beneficiary management components within OpenG2P to address some of the social protection use cases that are out there. And then looking forward to integrating both like the payment manager as well as the payment hub to facilitate some of this pre-processing that's necessary before a transaction can utilize the bulk payment API within Mojaloop. And then just on the social protection front, the last point, I'd make is we are in our collaboration with MOSIP working now around more identity biometric-based payments. And so the first use case we're aiming to work with MOSIP on is with a ministry in the Philippines around one of their conditional cash transfer programs. And we're looking forward to some of the upstream contributions that will potentially entail. But I'm now going to pass it over to Istvan, who's going to speak to the payment hub as a gateway concept. So.
Yeah, we participated in the Singaporean CBDC challenge with, I would say, pretty good results, and the whole solution was quite interesting, and we are building out this solution. The concept, the main point, as you see on the left side, there are these biometric capable cards which do support even offline transactions across account holders, having Bluetooth and other technologies in them. But we could say that what is happening really stable coin-like transactions on a distributed ledger in these cases. Some could be offline given the card capability, which needs to be synchronized sooner or later to the DLT. But in this whole ecosystem, there needs to be one component who's connecting the fiat currency world and this DLT ecosystem. And this is where the payment hub and Finera could be the main participants, becoming an issuing gateway. And so let's say on the Mojaloop network, we receive, or at least our partner bank receives the necessary funding to do this. And in the middle, the payment hub orchestrates the flow, and the Finera backend keeps the let's say centralized ledger, the legacy ledger part of the solution with the fiat currencies, and ultimately issuing the necessary coins on the DLT that the card holders could utilize to make transactions online or offline this method. And using the applications, they could also utilize their tokens to kind of convert it back and initiate a fiat currency transaction from our, let's say, operational account, going back to one of the fiat currency banks on one of the networks. And so that's the concept, or that's kind of a solution that we are working towards to implement this.
Okay, thanks, Istvan. And so especially around this last use case and those centering around social protection in G2P, we're looking forward to continued innovation and hope to have better updates and more progress to share at the next convening. And so I just want to close on two last points before we turn it over to questions and answers. So first off, around the roadmap, we're aiming in talks with the teams working on the fraud and risk management components. Would like to test and demonstrate this at the DFSP level. Like discussed earlier, want to have working integrations with both the bulk payment as well as PISP APIs within Mojaloop. And then we're continuing to build out other connectors to other core banking systems as well as other payment schemas. And there are a number of other use cases, especially around Pan-African digital banks and banks looking to modernize their payment infrastructure within Africa, that we're hoping to help accelerate. And then as Istvan has spoken to before, there still is the opportunity to build in stand-in capabilities utilizing the payment hub for those institutions that don't have 24/7 operations. And sorry, I skipped a slide. So here is where, I want to make the call to collaboration. So as Istvan noted, we have been open source from day one, and we do have a very vibrant Mifos ecosystem that we think can add a lot of value to the Mojaloop community. And then I've been happy to also already see, previous and current members of the Mifos ecosystem, like BitsaWorks, have such a leadership role within Mojaloop. So one, I want to see more of that collaboration be able to take place. But then some of the areas we are eager to have deeper collaboration around, center around, this alignment of various digital public goods, especially in the context around social protection programs and digitizing government bulk payments. I have been having a number of good conversations with Robert from Africa Nenda and how the tools that Mifos is bringing there can help to advance the adoption of instant inclusive payment systems. As noted earlier, have been having conversations with the fraud and risk management team to help demonstrate and test that out through the Payment Hub or Fineract. Our Mifos lab environment will be live soon once again. And so in talks with Lewis to make sure we can connect into the centralized Mojaloop community sandbox. And then we're doing this on top of Azure using their credits for open source project. So hoping to leverage some of the existing efforts that Greg and Cybrin are doing with Microsoft and Azure and optimizing Mojaloop performance there. As Istvan noted, around stablecoins and CBDC innovation. And then for all of the MFI collection work that we did, that was utilizing and following the GSMA mobile money API standards. So we'd like to continue to do more integration and collaboration in that regard. And then lastly, going back to this notion of community and ecosystem development, we have been able to, learn a lot of lessons over the years about how to enable upstream contribution. So I want to bring to bear some of those lessons to this community. And then already seeing, good cross-pollination, but want to try to get more of the providers in our ecosystem as a part of the Mojaloop ecosystem. And then lastly, some of the providers like Cybrin are already starting to use Mifos and Fineract as part of their sandbox environments. But I want to thank everybody once again for the opportunity to give an update. And we've got a couple minutes for question and answers, but I'm hoping that at the next convening, both Istvan and myself will be able to be there in person and see everyone once again. So.
Thanks so much. A round of applause for them. We will, in interest of time, we'll skip the question and answers, but I will ask that if you can go on Slack and post any questions for Ed and Istvan, that would be great. As we transition to the next session, I'd encourage you all to stand and take a short, just stand and stretch while we get the next